All right, so now that everyone else has introduced themselves, you may be wondering, who am I and why am I here after all? So my background here is actually not in IT at all, even though I work for the research IT group. I started off as a medieval Slavist. I worked on a corpus of birch bark letters from North Russia. And after leaving a PhD program after a couple months, I started working in central IT, mostly around digital humanities type research, and things have sort of continued from there. So as Susan mentioned, I work in the research IT group in the Office of the CIO. The program that I help manage is the digital humanities program. And among other things, we provide free consulting for people who have ideas that maybe they want to integrate technology into their research but aren't really sure how, or have an idea for a project and aren't really sure how to write a grant. Really, any stage of the research process, we're available to just talk to people. Within Research IT, we also offer broader consulting, not just for the humanities. So even if you're not in the humanities, there sounds like there's many of you from econ and other areas. We're still working out the exact parameters of our consulting program, but please feel free to get in touch with us, and we'll help if we can. So thank you for coming this morning and for being part of this. This is a course that has been through multiple iterations. It was taught as a week-long course at the Digital Humanities Summer Institute at the University of Victoria last summer. Berkeley actually was a co-sponsor of it last year and is this year as well. So if you're interested in attending an intensive week-long course on digital tools and methodologies for research, particularly in the humanities, but there's also some applications within the social sciences. If you go to the Digital Humanities site, there's information about how you can apply for a scholarship for that, or just attend with our discounted tuition rate. So as the Thursday session, I've already tested this out on the Wednesday session, so you're also benefiting from the brave souls who have watched me try to cram all of this content into 2 hours, and now I have a better sense of what's realistic. So hopefully this session will go smoothly, and it'll be beneficial for the people who are watching it later on as well. So now that you've all gathered here to learn about Drupal, let's ask the starting question: do you even need Drupal? Or maybe what you need is WordPress, or Omeka, or MediaWiki, or custom programming, or any of the many web-based installable tools for digital research. So the way I like to think about these is using the analogy of children's toys. So platforms like WordPress and Omeka and MediaWiki are, if you will, a dollhouse. There are certain things that they do that once you install them and get them running, they just take care of that stuff for you. You can immediately get to the action of playing in your dollhouse. You can set up tables and you can do things like that, but you have a fairly concrete structure around that. Like, you have a dollhouse like this. If you want to add a exciting water park slide to your dollhouse, suddenly things are going to be a little bit awkward. You'll have to use duct tape to adhere a piece of plastic to it. And likewise with these platforms, WordPress is really great for if you have a fairly static informational site, maybe with a blog, just pages of content that you type in and other people read, and that's kind of the extent of the interaction. There are plugins for it that can extend the range of things that it does. There's the BuddyPress plugins that kind of provide a social network, and then there's plugins for that, such as Commons in a Box. They're sort of a one-click spin-up, a scholarly network with tools for collaboration and communication, which is all really great if that's what you want to do. If what you want to do matches well with one of these platforms, Omeka provides a way to do exhibits, online, putting in fairly standard metadata about things and then displaying them, as an online exhibit. And MediaWiki, is the platform behind Wikipedia. So if you have a community collaboratively edited thing where no one really has more rights than others to, for the most part, these are all things that you can just plug in and you can do and get on with business. Custom programming is kind of the far opposite extreme of that. And this is Play-Doh. Not only is it not a dollhouse, it doesn't really have any form or shape. You can make absolutely anything, if you have a programmer and funding to do it. And funding to do it is one of the key problems with that. Historically, a lot of projects were done using one-off custom programming. All of the CD-ROM series, of the 90s. For those of you who remember that far back. All of this is custom programming, which is very expensive to do. Also not very good from a sustainability point of view. A lot of work goes into it, but it's hard to reuse down the road. Or if your programmer leaves, suddenly you have someone else trying to maintain the system, and they may not really understand it very well. There's no kind of common set of knowledge. So for a lot of projects, custom programming is just really not an option due to the cost, if nothing else. And there's other reasons, like sustainability, that make it a not very attractive approach either. So Drupal here is somewhere in the middle. I like to think of Drupal as Legos. You can do a dollhouse out of Legos if you want, or you can do an entire village, or you could, go in a completely different direction and do a cat cage out of Legos. But you're still using the same fundamental pieces, and if you know how to click together Legos, you can build all sorts of different things. The downside to it is, much like Legos, if what you want to do is play in a dollhouse, you're going to have to spend a lot of time building up your dollhouse out of Legos. But the nice thing is, once you've invested that time, you have a dollhouse that looks exactly the way you want it. It's not an off-the-shelf dollhouse. If you want a dynamic water slide, coming out, you can make a seamless water slide coming out of your Lego dollhouse. So this is much the same with Drupal. The way that I'm teaching this course and the way that I encourage scholars to think about Drupal is a no-code approach. If you have no background in programming whatsoever, if you don't know what PHP or CSS or HTML stand for, let alone how to do it, no problem at all. You can still do sites in Drupal. It's all a matter of some pretty basic configuration to get sites spun up, and depending on the system that you use, you don't even really have to do a whole lot. It's kind of a point and click setup, and from there it's all configurations through a user interface. There's admin screens, you configure them, and you never ever have to look at code necessarily. So it's really powerful. And it kind of lets you focus on the things that you have expertise in, which is the data itself and how that should be organized and stored and displayed and analyzed, rather than having to futz around with the code level of things. So where Drupal is most useful, the presentation and organization of curated research collections, especially with collaborators. If you have data, you can use Drupal to create these custom forms called content types to store your data. That captures the metadata that's important to you and that you want to use for your analysis and comparison and juxtaposition of different resources, especially with collaborators. So this there's a way that you can easily add users to the system, and the nice thing about it is it's very easy to give people different levels of permissions. And when I show you the permissions screen, your eyes will glaze over the number of checkboxes involved, which is annoying to configure, but actually a really good thing, because if there are undergrads who are doing data entry and you want to give them different permissions than the grad students, or even if you want to break that up more finely and say, okay, these are the reliable undergrads, and these are the ones who, you got to check their work a little bit more closely. You can assign them different roles and then let them do different things, so that only the people that you really trust have access to being able to delete things, for instance. It's really great. Directories of one sort or another are very easy to create in Drupal. Again, you kind of create these templates, and then you can expose these forms saying, okay, show me all the things in my database that meet criteria A, B, and C. And we can go through some examples of that. And also community building. So, it's easy to make a site like we have for Digital Humanities that will allow people to create profiles for their projects, but without giving them permissions to access the whole site. So there's a bunch of different things that you can do with Drupal, and it's a very flexible and useful tool in a lot of contexts, especially if you don't have grant funding for your project or limited resources. Really anyone can build a site like this without having to find a programmer. So the downside, perhaps, is that Drupal is a generic tool. So it's supported by a huge international developer community, mostly not affiliated with universities. I saw a report the other day that was looking at the number of contributors to other, to a wide variety of open source projects. And Drupal actually comes out as the project with the greatest number of contributors, even more than some of the more famous open source projects run by the Apache Foundation and so forth. There are literally thousands upon thousands of people who have contributed something to Drupal, be it a whole module or even just a few lines of code to fix something. Tremendous developer community out there. The scholarly use of Drupal comes down to the selection and configuration of modules and content types. So modules are little packages of code that provide a specific bit of functionality. Be it anything from being able to list and organize and display your data to being able to show it on a map, providing ways to integrate with university authentication and login systems. All of this stuff is available as modules. And there's a thing in Drupal where you can build modules that depend on other modules that depend on other modules, and so you can get multiple layers deep of modules, each of which tweaks the functionality of another package of functionality, just a little bit to get the site to do what you want it to do. And there's also a growing community of projects that use it both at Berkeley and elsewhere for digital humanities. So like I mentioned at the Digital Humanities Summer Institute, last year was the first year that they offered a Drupal course after multiple years of requests for it. There's a lot of digital humanities projects there using it. It sounds like it's being adopted in other disciplines as well, which is kind of exciting to hear about. And it's also being used administratively. So there's a strong community of people here at Berkeley who know how to use Drupal or some part of Drupal. So if you're having an issue or need to find someone to talk about, there are people around that you can find to get help with that. So what this workshop will cover, today we'll have a technical overview of Drupal just so you can understand the different components. So if you ever see it on forums and so forth, you'll know kind of what level it's referring to. We'll set up a new Drupal site using Pantheon, which is a cloud hosting provider. We'll talk about installing and enabling modules. We'll talk about key concepts for building Drupal sites, and we'll do an introduction to data modeling. Next week, we'll have a further discussion of data modeling. We'll actually build some content types. We'll work on adding content to the site, and we'll talk about blocks, which I'll explain shortly, and themes, which is how your site actually looks. And then in the final week, we will get into views, which is this extremely powerful module for organizing your data in a wide variety of ways, whether you want a list or a directory or a map or a way to export it. You can do all of this with views. We'll talk about menus. We'll talk about users and roles. And then image styles, slideshows, maps, timelines, etc. It all depends on how much time it actually ends up taking, and I haven't yet run the Wednesday version of this one, so I can't quite guarantee what all we'll be able to fit in. But I do often present at the Berkeley Drupal users group meetings, which are held once a month. So if there's other topics that you're interested in that we don't have time to cover through this, let me know, and I'll find some way to cover that at some point. So Pantheon hosting. It is free for anyone to develop a site, which is really great, especially if you're just playing with Drupal and want to, create a site, set it up, figure out how it works, without having to go through the work of, actually having to set up your own database. It really streamlines things. The downside, though, for a lot of, especially individual scholarly projects, is the cost. It is $20 a month for a basic site with a few visitors. $75 a month for more server resources, versus around $10 a month for inexpensive external shared hosting that can run multiple sites. There's also another service that I know other universities have used called Reclaim Hosting that for $15 or $20 a year will host your site, and they even provide tech support. So it's quite expensive, even though Berkeley does get a slight discount on Pantheon hosting. So what I tend to do is I use it for my development sites, but when I actually want to take the site live, I move it somewhere else because my projects tend to not have the kinds of resources that would be able to support a budget like this for hosting.
Just the name of the Reclaim hosting?
Reclaim hosting. Yeah, and that's actually one of the options that we're currently exploring, to be able to support digital humanities sites. So for now, for today, we're going to use Pantheon to spin up our sites just because it will save us a lot of time, and it works better than other approaches I've tried in these workshops. So let's head over to getpantheon.com. And if you haven't already, hit this create free account, and you'll want to log in with your Berkeley credentials. I think that will give you access possibly to more free sites than otherwise, although I've heard mixed reports about this.
I think you get 10 free sites if you're part of UC and 3 if you're not.
That's what I thought, but someone else who registered with their Berkeley account during the last session said that they only got like 3 sites. So we'll see what the audience manages to come up with.
So we click create free account, but then we enter somehow we associate with Berkeley?
Yeah, the email address that you use when you create the account, just put in your Berkeley email address. All right, so does everyone have an account set up at this point? All right. So before we actually dive into starting our site, let's talk briefly about a technical overview of Drupal. And I think for this, I'm going to use the whiteboard here. Can everyone see if I write on this? Even you folks on the end? Okay, great. So technical overview of Drupal. Drupal has at its base a database. This is generally a MySQL database, although Drupal can run on other databases. Generally, open source databases are preferred, although I've heard talk of it running on some Microsoft proprietary stuff as well. And the thing about the database is this stores more or less everything, with the exception of your files that you upload, so any images, video, audio, stuff like that, that's stored externally. But everything is mushed up together in this database, ranging from the actual content that you type in to the configuration settings that you have. So this can be kind of challenging for if you have a development site and a live site, being able to move some of those settings back and forth if your content is different. They're not separate really in any way. They're all together in the database. Although there are some modules that can try to deal with this problem. Yeah, basically everything lives here. What talks to that database is Drupal core. And this is the core essential set of files that all Drupal sites have, if they are, in fact, Drupal sites. Drupal core is basically written in PHP, although, of course, there's some JavaScript and CSS thrown in there. And this talks to the database. Beyond that, what you have on top of this, this part is universal for all Drupal sites. But what you have on top of that are additional module packages. and these are going to vary from site to site. There are some modules, and we'll talk about those, that basically every Drupal site these days has. So things like token and views, things that, when you get right down to it, probably should have been included in Drupal core. Some of them will be included in Drupal core in version 8, but we're in version 7. But beyond that, there's usually a lot of modules that are just custom specific to your site. So there's a module that provides a content type for bibliography entries. There's one that provides maps. There's one that provides tag clouds. And the choice of modules is basically one of the things that shapes your site. And these are all like Drupal core, PHP. There are, in addition to this, theme packet, so theme, actually, layer it this way. And a site can have multiple different themes. So if you want it to look one way for users who are logged in, and another one for unauthenticated users, or one way for students and another one for faculty, if it should be purple for faculty, but blue for students even, I mean, you can have completely different themes. Generally, there's just one that's your default theme, and this is, a combination of PHP, CSS, JavaScript, and so forth. And that determines how your site looks and feels to users. So these are the major components. What we're about to do in actually setting up the site is taking advantage of the fact that Pantheon has infrastructure that can recreate a database and set up a new instance of Drupal core, and it will connect those two, and then we'll have a Drupal site, and we'll begin the exciting and customized work of adding the modules that we need and the themes we need. All the themes we'll deal with next week. So that's the technical overview of Drupal here. Let's go put that into practice by heading over to Pantheon, and I'm going to log in here. And I run like 8 million different sites, so pardon all of the stuff here. Do you all see something that looks kind of like this, create new site?
Yeah, that's several button, but I think other people do too.
Okay, so you've got something along those lines. All right, so let's click create a new site, whatever that happens to look like for you. We'll go. We'll say it's UC Berkeley. Why not? Do keep in mind that you shouldn't be putting restricted data on these sites. They're not signed off for things like student ID number, any person identifying bullet information, so forth. But for most data sets, it should be all right. So you'll give it a name, UC Berkeley, and we'll hit create site. And we will say start from scratch, and we will say Drupal 7. At this point, you definitely want to be using Drupal 7. There tends to be a lag time between when a new version of Drupal comes out and when there's enough modules that are updated that it's usable. With Drupal 7, it was about a year. Drupal 8 hasn't come out yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's more than a year for Drupal 8. So for the time being and for the mid-term future, you should be going with Drupal 7. So we'll hit install Drupal 7. And Pantheon's kind of cute with its status messages. Those aren't actual status messages. You'll see things involving like petting kittens later on, depending on how it goes. So yeah.
I'm beginning.
Yeah. I think it must have been fun to be the intern who came up with the status messages on this one. It's probably going slow because we're all doing it at the same time, but it will actually finish. While it's taking its time, let's talk about some components of Drupal here. So we've already talked briefly about content types, and these are the forms that you create to store your data in. And one of the things we'll be talking about at length is figuring out what those content types should be for your specific data set. Because getting those content types right is really important for having a site that makes sense, where it's easy to enter data, where it's easy to make the connections between different types of data that you need. So that's a really key concept there. In Drupal jargon, a node is basically an instantiation of a content type. So you have a content type, you put data in there, you hit save, and what you get at the other end is a node that has that data. It's often roughly parallel to a page, although I mean with things like the basic page content type, where you could do an about page for your site, or an article where you could do sort of a blog post, then it's basically equivalent to a page. But with Drupal, you can also set up content types that are only intended to store data that will appear in other contexts, and you don't really intend for users to ever be looking at the nodes created by that specific content type. So you might have a content type that just has geographic coordinates for a location, and all the other information about that location is stored as part of other data and other content types, which is totally okay, and might make the most sense for your project. But you never intend people to ever be looking at the page that just has those coordinates. So it's better to think of them, as nodes or something a little bit more abstract than a page as such. Drupal has a system called taxonomy, where you can define different vocabularies and put different terms in them. So this is used for things like free tagging. You just, as you're typing, you put in a bunch of terms to associate with a given node, and those are added to the vocabulary, and you can reference them later. Or you can do a control vocabulary where you define the terms, and users have to pick from some of those terms. You can also create hierarchies within those. So you can have parent terms and child terms, and then set up relationships between them, so that if things are tagged with a child term, the parent term automatically gets added. There's a module for that. So the views module is really essential. It's the module that allows you to display your content as something other than just like a rolling stream of data, WordPress style. It allows you to say, okay, I want all of the people in the database, but I only want to see those who were born after 1962. And let me toggle showing men versus women, or something like that. You can set up all of that stuff with views. For those of you who have a little bit more technical background, views is basically a user interface onto SQL, where it's all pointing and clicking, but what you're basically creating is SQL commands. A block in Drupal is basically a chunk of information or functionality. So there's things like a login block, or a word tag cloud block. And it's a chunk of content or functionality that you put in a specific place on a specific page. So it kind of has to do with the display of things. Menus, it has a menu system. You can create multiple menus and put them places. Nothing all that exciting there, but it does have it. Users, you can have multiple people accessing the site, each with their own credentials. There is a kind of a package of modules that you can download that provides integration with the UC Berkeley CAS authentication, so using your CalNet credentials to log into a site for extra security. So that's kind of handy. And as I mentioned before, there's roles, so giving different people different sets of permissions. So let's see if Pantheon has finished its work here. All right, my site is ready. Are other people's sites ready? All right, great. So we're going to visit the dashboard. So Pantheon does have the ability to manage code using Git or through SFTP. We're going to make sure that it stays on SFTP for now, because that allows you to install modules and themes using the user interface, which is pretty handy. But if there's anyone who likes Git, that's an option there too. So now what we're going to want to do is hit this visit development site right here. And we will choose the profile. Usually there's like standard or advanced, because we're on Pantheon. It has this instead. This doesn't actually preclude you from moving your site off Pantheon. There's really nothing so deeply baked into its infrastructure that will mess up your site elsewhere. So don't worry about that. We'll just choose Pantheon and hit save and continue. English, you can actually install Drupal in other languages. There are translation packs for a wide variety of languages, although the number of modules that are supported varies language by language. We'll go with English for now, but there actually is a pretty robust suite of multilingual modules to support multilingual content and so forth. So if you're interested in that, there are ways of doing it with Drupal. And you may notice here that we conveniently just skipped a bunch of steps right here. Verify requirements, set up database, install profile stuff. All of this was done automatically for us using Pantheon. If we were setting it up by ourselves, we need to make sure that some of the file system permissions were set up right, that the database was set up right with a user that has the right set of permissions. It's not all that hard. It's just kind of a tedious step-by-step process, and Pantheon just takes care of it for us. So that's handy. I will include on the last day a section on how to get your site off of Pantheon to host it elsewhere too. So don't worry about it. Alright, so here we are in site information. You can change this, so don't feel like you're committing to anything serious here. Just give it a name. This is the name that's going to appear at the top of all your pages as a site name. This will be Quinn's Thursday site. The site email address. So if you're running an actual site, you don't want this to be your own email address. This is going to be the email address from which things like password requests get sent. And so if someone replies to that, like, you don't want it to come from you. Also, sometimes they'll get flagged as spam if it's coming from a different domain than what you have. So if you're setting up a site that has an external URL like myawesomesite.org, you ideally want it to be a admin@myawesomesite.org kind of email address. If it's a berkeley.edu, it should have a berkeley.edu email address, maybe like a list email or something for managing this kind of thing. For today, we'll just be bad and put my own email address here. Site maintenance account. So this really, really, really should not be your personal account. This should be an account that you write down the credentials somewhere safe and don't give it out basically to anyone. This is the information for the account that has irrevocable access to absolutely everything always. All the module configurations, there's the ability to update things. There's no way to curtail the power of this one account. So if you're doing this right, this should be like, just an account called like admin or something, an email address, that's associated with the project itself rather than you. This is the account that you want to have in the, like, if I get hit by a bus, like, safe place file here, so that other people can access the account and keep working on it if you're not available to help manage it. We'll put my email address again. What you should do is create this account, log in with it only long enough to create an account for yourself personally with your own email address and your own name, and then set it aside and not use it anymore. But for now, we'll do it the bad way. Default country, this has some implications for what it thinks the first day of the week is, for what that's worth. We'll say US, default time zone. Alright, so here we are down at update notifications. So we'll uncheck receive email notifications because that will get pretty annoying quickly. What it does is it would send out an email every time there's a module that needs updating, which actually isn't a terrible thing if there's a site that you set up and aren't going to be using often. But if it's a site that you're using often, there'll also be a little warning that pops up when there are module updates. What I do personally is I have a to-do list item that repeats, first day of every month, where I say, okay, go in and update, do all the module updates for this site for this month, and I go back and just take care of everything new that's come out this month. And every month there is something. For better or for worse, there's a large community of people who identify security holes and add new features to modules. And as tempting as it is to blow off module updates, and yeah, you can probably get away with it for a month, 2 months. If you let this ride for too long, your site will become an absolute mess. Even assuming it's not hacked. If you wait too long, sometimes it'll be hard to update because there'll just be enough things that have gone past that things will get messed up. So if you want to keep your site in good working order, you really should do the updates routinely. One thing you do want to make sure you have here is make sure this check for updates automatically is enabled. What this also does is allow you to update or to install modules and themes through the UI. If you don't have that checked, there's someplace else you can enable it, but it'll be a lot easier if you don't run into that problem and just keep this checked. So we've done all that. We will save and continue. Alright, and defaults continued. Congratulations, you've installed Drupal. Now let's visit our new site. And here we are. You're looking at Drupal. And you may wonder, so what do I do now? Sadly, this is actually a lot clearer about what you do now than Drupal 6 was. But there's a lot of work to be done before you actually have something resembling a site that works the way you want. And again, this is all coming down again to Legos. Drupal is not really anything out of the box. I mean, out of the box, it's a gimpy WordPress. Honestly, it's not nearly as good as WordPress. Just if you were to try to use it as is. But what you get out of it is all in the modules and stuff you install. So now that we have Drupal, let's take a look at some of the things that you could get if you were to configure some things and run through some quick example sites. So there's a project that I work on around Bulgarian dialectology. This is what traditional Bulgarian dialectological work looks like. You have these atlases with columns and columns of eye blurring data that talk about in each of these different locations how certain words are pronounced, and each of these different sections is corresponds with a map that's in an entirely different section of this giant atlas that kind of does this crude color coding of is it pronounced this way or is it pronounced that way, which is a very pre-digital way to manage this data. I was working with a faculty member in the Slavic department, Renelle Alexander, who was preparing a print edition of her own dialectology work, where she went out to the field and rather than collecting, how do you pronounce this list of words, she actually talked to people about their customs and their traditions and their lives and funny anecdotes from their lives, and actually recorded these things and then transcribed them later, both a transcription of the Bulgarian and then a gloss for every word, and then a translation into English. And she was working on preparing a print edition out of all of this, as you can see here in Word. So that seemed like kind of an inefficient way to do things, so I proposed, all right, let's build a site for this. And what we got was this. So there's a way to regenerate something that more closely resembles those classic dialectology maps here. Because we know the coordinates of the different places that she visited, we can pull up a map that shows all the places that show a certain trait, be it linguistic or cultural. There's an interface here for entering every single line. So this is each word in the line is entered separately, and it's a pointer to that word that exists uniquely in the database, or maybe multiple texts point to that same word. But we can enter the information about, is this a verb, is this a noun, is it singular, is it plural? We can enter that information once instead of having to gloss it every single time that word comes up. There's also a place, as I mentioned, to put in the word metadata. All of this metadata are things that she thought were important to capture about the word. This is not necessarily a standard list, but it was the list of things that were important for the specific project, and we were able to accommodate that. Then we were able to do this text display with linguistic metadata that's more or less parallel to the Word doc that I showed you before. But the nice thing about it is, unlike with a Word doc, where if you want to reformat it, you have to go back and like manually change every single line, with Drupal, you can just do a little bit of configuration. I mean, like literally 60 seconds of configuration, and you can get this display that gets rid of all of the linguistic metadata and just gets you a readable text. And it applies to every single text, all at once, which is a lot easier than doing this, out of Word. There's also a way to do a lexicon, so associating every word with their dictionary form. You can see all the different forms of a given word and where they occur. You can use this grammatical categories interface to filter the words by ones that match certain properties. And then you can sort of associate that with a map to see all the places that, in this case, have a double accent and what text they occur in. You can also do thematic content. So there was tagging on the content itself saying, all right, these lines refer to a religious practice. You can pull together everything that meets those criteria. And in terms of content types, this is what it looks like. So we had a token content type, a line content type, a text, a location, a lexeme, commentary, and an informant. And these arrows are places where there's a field that points to a different content type. So within this line, there's multiple tokens, and this token here is a pointer to this token content type where different words or tokens are put into the database. So this is an example of kind of what a finished site can look like, structurally behind the scenes. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Was there any modules needed for that had to be custom made or?
Nothing. Zilch. Every single project that I've done, no custom modules, which is directly a consequence of the fact that I don't know PHP and I don't have grant funding for a lot of these. So poverty and ignorance actually can be useful constraints to work within. Because I mean, some of the stuff about custom programming applies here too, where like you could get someone to write a custom module, but then someone has to maintain it, and you have to pay someone to maintain it if that person isn't on your team. So I mean, with all of these, what I've been advocating for is to the extent possible, and sometimes it's not possible, but I'd say about 85 to 90% of the projects that I've worked on, they've been able to get something that works for them. Not that they're necessarily totally thrilled with every aspect of it, and like some things would be facilitated by a custom module, but like they're able to get most of the way there to something that they're like reasonably happy with no custom coding at all. Yeah.
Can you export this data, like if you wanted to print it?
Yes. Yeah. You can export it in a number of different ways. There's a module called Views Data Export that can get you a CSV if you wanted to import it into some other system. It can get you an Excel spreadsheet. It can even get you a Word document if you want to export something that's more readable. And all of it's configurable with all the parameters you can with Views. Yeah.
Does this qualify as like a free site that like multiple people can go and see, but multiple people aren't necessarily changing?
So right now, this will change. Right now, this is just a private internal site that only the research assistants can access. It will be public. I think the plan is for it to be next year, but she wants to get more data in before she opens it up. But once that happens, it will have that aspect of a lot of people being able to see it, but only certain people being able to access it.
So, but right now, like with the research assistants also accessing, is it still a free site?
What do you mean by free?
Is it? Do you have to pay extra for hosting it because multiple?
Oh, with Pantheon?
Yeah.
Okay, so this site is actually hosted on a server run out of linguistics, but the only constraint on the free site from the Pantheon angle really is that you get a very ugly URL, which is not good for sending out to the world saying like, look at my awesome project. You can have as many people as you want adding data to it, and if your community is willing to overlook the really ugly URL, you can just roll with the free site indefinitely. And there actually are some things that we use in our department for internal uses where like we don't care about the URL, and so we're just using the free site, no problem. So yeah.
Can't you just bit me your tiny URL and make a nice URL for your ugly URL?
You could, but then when they click on it, like if they look at the URL bar, they'll see it's like whatever /dev.pantheon. So I mean, yeah. But yeah, I mean you can build, you can basically run like a full live site, like save the ugly URL using the free hosting bit. So it's kind of handy that way. Any other questions? All right, so another site that will actually be the basis of the example that we work through together, if you choose to work through the example site, is called Founders on the Founders, and this is a project I've dabbled with on and off for a little while as a Drupal version of an HTML site by the Department of History at UW-Madison. And this is a really cool data set, I think. There's a biography on a number of historical figures around the founding of the United States, and then a bunch of quotes about that person, sometimes by that person, sometimes by other founding fathers and people from that milieu. So it's kind of like historical gossip. And so we got everyone talking about here, everyone talking about George Washington. And so we'll work through how you would create content types to be able to support this and do nifty things with it. So from past versions of the site that I've created, here we have this overview of people, this nice little grid. We have a profile for an individual. And then we have this Facebook-like timeline of quotes about the person. So we'll talk through how to actually create all this stuff. All right, so now back to our own sites. The first thing to do, I mean, literally this is the first thing that I do on every site that I create, is I start installing modules. And the first module I install is called Administration Menu. I literally can't work on a Drupal site without this module, because what it does is it takes this administration menu up here, which actually wasn't available in Drupal 6. So this alone is a big improvement. And it lets you drill down into the deepest levels of the configuration settings without having to click a million times. So what we'll do is we will click on modules here. And if you had that box checked for check for updates automatically, you should see install new module right here. Is there anyone who doesn't see install new module here? All right, fabulous. There's usually at least one person, but congratulations on all having this one here. All right, so we're going to click on this. And we get to the module installation screen. So as it says here, you can find modules and themes on Drupal.org. Just for kicks, let's open this in a new tab and see what we get. Here we are, 15,850 modules. Match your search. This is not the world's most useful thing, really. You can start filtering things. We're like, all right, I don't know what the development status is. We want Drupal 7 at least. Let's see how many modules we got there. Ah, a mere 9,492 modules. This will be easy. Honestly, I never use the Drupal site itself for finding modules. It's where they all are stored. It's where you should be getting them from, but it's not where you go to search for them. And where you go to search for them is, as with so many other things, Google. So we say Drupal administration menu module, and it will take you right there. This is not a given with the search on the Drupal.org site. Sometimes it's buried kind of deep down what you actually want, but Google will get you there. And similarly for other modules, if you don't really know what module you need, start throwing keywords into Google with Drupal and module and see what comes up. Sometimes you'll get a module just like cropping right up there for you that does what you need. And other times you'll see forum postings and discussions that will point you to modules. One important thing about where you get modules, for the most part, you should just be downloading them and installing them from Drupal.org. Module code is available other places, but if it's on Drupal.org, it means that it has gone through at least one layer of basic vetting and security checks and stuff like that, that it meets the Drupal coding standards. It's generally, it meets a certain threshold of quality. Whereas if you just get something from GitHub or whatnot, you have no idea what you're installing on your site, and it could really blow things up, delete data, all sorts of terrible things. So in general, go for Drupal.org. There are some cases where I've installed modules that, like, where I know the creator, I know what the status of the module is, it's available elsewhere, but that's sort of like the gray market of Drupal modules. And at least as you're getting started, stick with Drupal.org. Alright, so here we are on the administration menu module page. We're going to scroll down and keep scrolling and keep scrolling and keep scrolling until we see this download section here. And what we're going to want to do is, if it's available, go for the green recommended release here. It needs to be version 7.x. Drupal modules are not backwards compatible, so if you try to install a Drupal 6 module, it just won't work. What we will do is we will copy the link address. It doesn't matter whether you use the zip or the tar.gz, either way, totally fine. So yeah, copy the link address. You could download the module and then upload it to your site if you really wanted, but this is just a little bit easier. We'll go back to modules here, and we will paste into the install from URL field, and we will hit install. Alright, installation was completed successfully. Is everyone seeing something like that? Anyone seeing anything else? No? Alright, great. So,
I've got something else.
oh, what do you got?
Cannot extract temporary :// update hash AA0.
Ew. Try refreshing the module page and try it again. It might just be a hiccup on Pantheon. Are you still getting it? Alright, so the next thing we can do here is, does everyone see the enable newly added modules thing? Alright, so we're going to click enable newly added modules, and what this will not do is enable our newly added modules. In fact, all it does is take us to the modules page, which, as we'll see in a moment, is actually kind of a good thing. So let's scroll down through the list of things. Let me, oh, no problem.
I got off my page.
Did you install the module?
No, I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, so go to modules,
Modules. Okay.
and then install new module, and then alright, install.
Okay.
Yeah. Alright, so we're scrolling down on the module page through the core set of modules here. We want to uncheck this toolbar, which you'll find kind of in the first set of modules there. And what that will do is get rid of this toolbar up front, because we're going to install a better one. If you don't do that, you'll have two toolbars and it will look very funny. So,
I hate to be a problem.
Oh.
What happens after this?
enable newly added modules, and then you'll be on the same page as us. Yeah, so then from there, uncheck toolbar, the toolbar module here, and then we'll keep scrolling, and under administration, you'll see these three modules here. And so this is the reason why, when it says enable newly added modules, it doesn't actually mean it. Because you need to choose which submodules you actually want enabled. In this case, that one package that we installed produced these three modules here, and we may not want all of them, which in this case we don't actually want all of them. All we want is this administration menu and administration menu toolbar style. We'll check those. And we'll scroll down and hit Save Configuration. And what you should see, if all went well, is your toolbar should be replaced with this nice one with little drop-down thingies that let you go all the way into the configuration, if you so desire. Did that work for everyone? Anyone that didn't work for?
What should it look like now? Did you say?
So your menu up on top should have these drop-down things on it. Everyone have the drop-down things? All right. So if you feel like you need some more practice with installing modules, or even if you don't, there's more modules to install. So let's do what we just did in terms of. Actually, we can go a little bit easier now that we have this admin menu. We can go from modules, install new module using the drop-down menu. And then we will take, for instance, backup and migrate. We'll say backup and migrate Drupal module. All right, take that, scroll down, copy our link, head back over. Oh. Paste that in there. Hit Hit install. And because we're going to be installing multiple modules, when you're done, you can just hit install another module, and it'll take you back to that page, and we can go through some more of them. So while you're working on that, I'll just give you a brief run through of what these different modules actually do. So there's the administration menu. Oh, come on. There's the administration menu that we just saw that provides those nifty drop-down menus for actually getting through the configuration. There's backup and migrate, which allows you to really easy, one-click back up your database. Which is great if you are about to try something new. Maybe you're installing a new module that you're not entirely sure of, or you're going to do something with your content type that you want to, possibly back out of if things don't go the way you think they are. It's kind of like a one-click safety net, so that if things go wrong in the thing you're about to try, you can just go back to the page, upload the database copy that you had just downloaded before you made the change you don't like, and you're back to where you were. So especially as you've started building your site out, but still aren't entirely comfortable with how things go, just going to backup and migrate and downloading a copy of the database periodically isn't a bad idea. CTools or Chaos Tool Suite is a requirement for the Views module, so you don't really have to worry about it except in that context. Path Auto is a module that allows you to have nicer looking URLs than you would otherwise. So with URLs in Drupal, by default, every node has a kind of internal system path. It's node / whatever the node's number is, and the number is basically what numbered node is it, how many nodes have been created before it, and then that number. Kind of by default on top of that, every node you create will have the URL content / something, I think, as the path, content / title as the path, unless you configure up path auto rules. And path auto rules will let you do things like, let's say you have a video content type, you can have the URL for those be like videos / the date you uploaded it / whatever the title is. It's kind of nice. Token is a module that lets you actually access little snippets of data, things like the title of the node, other metadata you've created to use it for things like path auto. And Views, as we've talked about, is the module that lets you kind of arrange and organize your data in a variety of ways. So has anyone run into trouble as they've been installing modules here? Is everything going pretty well on the modules front. All right.
So when we install, how do we know, so we have to go through that screen where you click the box, how do we know where it is? Is it?
You don't necessarily. All modules are organized into some category or another,
So we
and
just scroll till we see it?
or Control F to try to find it. There are, of course, modules that help try to organize your modules page. The modules page actually can get that ridiculous, with the number of things that can get installed.
Can
Well,
you click back on the list of the recommended
Yeah.
ones?
yeah, here, let me, sorry, let me pull it up. So you may be wondering, can you ever have too many modules? And the answer is kind of yes. You shouldn't, like, adding modules is a totally normal and expected thing to do with Drupal sites. But, oh, do you have a question?
Yeah, on the Path Auto, it's a zip. So when I go to copy that link, it's telling me it can't install it.
Oh, have you tried the tar.gz version?
When I copied that link, it gave me an error
A
because
couple different ones, this time there should be
Just
two.
hover over the tar-z one.
Copy that one.
Sounds like Pantheon may be having a issue with the zips
They're right
then.
next to each other.
Which
Which of the modules do you want us to enable in
So actually with, don't worry about checking any of the C tools. Just install views or check views and views UI once you add those. And it'll do something handy and say, hey, you need C tools. Like, do you want to install that? And it'll automatically check like just the ones you need for views. What Drupal won't do is if you don't have, like, if you try to install views and you don't have C tools available, it actually won't let you check the box, and it'll say, missing for C tools as a dependency. So that's kind of nice of it.
Views and views, see what?
Yeah. So yeah, on modules, basically you're on the hook for any module that you have installed and enabled when it comes to security holes and so forth. So if you have a bunch of modules that you have installed and you realize, I'm not really using this, it's a good idea to at least disable them, if not like remove them completely from the system, so that you don't have to deal with patching them as security and update patches come through.
Do you want us to enable backup and migrate Path Auto and token?
Yes. So in addition to that, if you have too many modules, and we're talking like hundreds of modules probably at this point, it can slow your site down. So don't hesitate to install modules, but also every now and again, like, look through the modules and see what you have enabled and consider whether you're actually still using them, and then disable accordingly.
Where can you find out what modules you have? Just
It's on that same modules page where you've been checking the boxes. Anything where the box is checked, you have enabled.
So each of these is going to have its own block, like whatever is inside, because I thought I installed the backup and migration, and I don't see it. I mean, I don't see other.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost no sense necessarily to like where things end up on the list. So sometimes you just have to like do a Control F for it. Yeah.
I found it and it's not letting me check it.
All right. What?
And it says backup migrate is missing.
Back up. Let's see what we got here. Oh, that's backup and migrate files. So that's actually a separate module. So did you install backup and migrate?
Let's see, maybe not.
how do we get back to the module control page?
If you just click on modules in your admin menu, it'll take you there. You don't necessarily have to go into a submenu. Like, each of the top level menus will go someplace too.
So it's this one?
Yes. Yeah. Question.
Which ones did you want us to enable? Views?
Oh. Views UI, token, path auto, backup and migrate, and when you try to enable views, and if you have C tools available, it'll automatically pick up the ones you need from that.
So only one of the C tools suite were automatically.
I think so. Yeah.
So
And-
check everything in C tools.
Just leave C tools empty, and when you enable views, it'll automatically pick up the one you need from
And
C
what,
tools.
Views and views UI?
Yeah.
Sorry, which of the C tools did you say to enable?
Don't worry about enabling any of the C tools ones specifically. Just enable views and views UI, and it will say, "Do you want to enable C tools?" And it'll do it for you. I mean, you could check them yourself too, but I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, and it'll do it for you. And so that's how I usually do it.
But token and path auto we do.
Yeah. All right, how's everyone going? Do people need more time to? You still adding modules? Everyone good? All right then. So, and you thought you were done installing modules. You're never done installing modules. There's more modules. We don't necessarily need to do these right now. We can do that towards the end or before next time. I've noticed that this session is going a little bit more quickly than the other one, so maybe we'll have time to do these today. But just so you know, the modules that we just installed, the back and migrate and the views and the C tools, those are all kind of lower level infrastructure modules for Drupal overall. And when we talk about actually building content types, we're going to need to install additional modules to be able to capture the data that we want to capture the way that we want to capture it. So again, depending on what your project is and what your data is, the modules you install for building your content types may be totally different than this. But this is a set of things that are often useful. So rather than making you sit through installing yet more modules for things right away, let's start talking about data modeling. So presumably your site has different types of content, and in general, you should be storing different types of content using different content, like Drupal content types. So by default, as you'll notice, if you look at your site, if you go to content, add content, you'll see the list of content types that were already kind of pre-created when Drupal was installed. This article and the basic page. These are content types that you can keep if they're useful for your site, or you can delete them. You can use them for something else if you want. But if you have a specific data set and you're trying to store your data in a granular way so that you can take advantage of kind of the analysis and visualization and display options of views, you're probably going to want to create more content types and ones that are tailored specifically to your data. So then the question is, how many content types do you have, and what should they look like? So for instance, there's a question of, is something data or metadata? And your data, kind of what your core data is, becomes your content types, and metadata becomes fields on those content types. So who has a data set and wants to be the class guinea pig?
Like an address book.
All right, an address book. Let's talk about an address book here. We can do a pretty fancy address book here with Drupal. So an address book, what's one of the things that we think should be a content type on an address book? What is a core piece of data?
Name. First.
Last
Oh,
name.
so is it last name? Would we actually want to have a content type that says last name? Is that kind of a core entity in there? It's an important piece of information, yes, but like, is that like the heart of it? What is the thing that we're actually trying to capture information about here?
Their
Contact.
address.
Location.
A contact. Yes. So this here, our content type is going to be a person. Or, well, I guess not necessarily. We could have things in our address book for like, you know, the dentist or the vet. So we'll say contact. We'll be a little bit more general than that. So yeah, name is an important field on there. So we should have a field for name. What else do we want to capture in our address book?
Telephone number.
All right, we've got a phone number, email,
URL.
URL.
Birthday.
Birthday. All right.
Special notes.
Notes.
Photo.
Photo. Little smiley face here.
Location?
Yep. Location.
You have location 1 and location 2,
Oh, we can have like multiple locations.
summer address and.
Same for everything, like phone numbers, email.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these can be multi-valued fields. So are there, like, we could create like a pretty simple, address book this way, but we can also do some fancier things. Like, let's say we want to be able to group people by where we know them from. So we could have, work contacts versus, contacts connected to our kids versus contacts connected to your school. So what we might want to do is over here set up kind of a, source, we'll call it, taxonomy that has some information about where we know them from. Work, school, and we'll say a source field here that's a pointer to the taxonomy. And we might want to define it so that we can only choose terms that we've already pre-created in the taxonomy. Or we might want to set it up so that it can be more like a tagging system where we can add new ones just kind of on the fly here. Now let's see if there's a way that we can make this a little bit more complicated. Let's say that we're also, in addition to storing information about our contacts, we're also storing, let's say this is like a business situation, and we also want to store invoices. These can be our clients, say. So we'll also have a content type called invoice. And this basically is a way to bill a client for some work that's done on a project. And we don't necessarily want to repeat information about the project in every single invoice. There's some core stuff about the project that we want to capture once and then be able to refer to later. So we'll have another content type here called project. And in this project, we can say, okay, who the client is. And this can be a pointer to one or more contacts. And maybe we can have, a description. And depending on, the line of work that we're in, we might have another taxonomy here with, some trait about the project that we associate back to the project. And we can even have, multiple different traits and multiple different taxonomies. We can have, what kind of work it is. We can have, level of difficulty. any number of things. You could have a URL here for what the project URL is, and then you can have our invoice is sort of a way to connect a person to a project with a specific dollar amount. So we can have cost, and that's going to be uniquely stored in this invoice, and then we'll have a pointer to client, and we'll have a pointer to project. So once we have something like this, we could say, all right, show me all invoices that have been billed in the last 30 days for projects with a low level of difficulty for clients that I know through school, or something like that. You can take all of this metadata, regardless of where it's stored, as long as things are appropriately, as long as you have appropriate pointers to these different areas, you can create these fairly complex views, around them. Let's say we have a location here. You want to see a map showing all the places that you send invoices to. So you could do that. You could just create a view that has a map display and show all the contacts for whom you've had at least one invoice on a map, and bam, there you have it. If you want like a chart or a graph or something like that, you can spit out all of this, all using content types and views and so forth. So that's one example of how you could do data modeling with something like that. So as I was saying, data or metadata, your core data becomes your content types, your metadata becomes fields. There's a question of whether something should be a taxonomy or a content type. And so let's say we want to associate a contact with a university. So the question is, this university field, what should this be? Do we need to create another content type for university? Or is this going to be a taxonomy, or is this just going to be like a plain text field? And again, all this comes down to what is it you actually want to do with this data. If you want to just be able to display that, like, contact A is associated with university B, you can just do a plain text field and put in whatever there, and like you're good. If you want to be able to, say, easily click on the name of the university associated with the contact and have pull up a page that shows all contacts associated with that university, then what you're looking at is a taxonomy, because that's how taxonomies behave. Like, taxonomies by default are displayed as links on a page that will take you to a list of everything that matches that trait. So maybe here we can do a university taxonomy. But let's say you're not really sure about whether you want to do that, because you also want to be able to associate geographic coordinates with the university for purposes of mapping down the line. The nice thing about taxonomies, although it does sort of muddy the work as we're trying to do data modeling, is that you can actually add fields to taxonomy terms the same way you do with content types. And so my rule of thumb here is, if you kind of need to add a field as a one-off, like a location field for a university, but the university is not really a fundamental thing that you're storing information about. The university doesn't really matter for your data set, but you need to be able to associate with contacts, and you need to be able to have a location with it. That's a case where you can use a taxonomy and then add a location field to it, and then you're good. There's a question of merging similar content types. So for instance, if you are creating a departmental website and you want to be able to have a profile for faculty and a profile for graduate students, and you want them to be subtly different, there's a little bit of a judgment call that you've got to make about whether they're different enough that you want two different content types for that, or whether you want to do something with, say, there's a conditional field module where you could have a little like checkbox at the top saying, is this faculty or is this student? When it's faculty, like pop down like these 2 extra fields that are faculty specific. If it's a grad student, pop down these 2 fields that are grad student specific. So that will, if you do it that way with conditional fields, it'll save you the effort of having to recreate, these 2 different content types that are mostly the same, adding the same fields to them over and over again. And you can use this conditional field to deal with like little minimalist tweaks. So that generally is a good way to go. But there are these Drupal-based considerations that are worth keeping in mind. In the case of faculty versus students, one of the things you might want to think about is this URL patterns with path auto. So if you want on your site faculty to show up under faculty / their name and grad students to be under grad student / their name, you may need to have 2 different content types because of the path auto settings. You may also be able to like do something where you use the like grad student versus faculty toggle down as to sort of fulfill that role. But it's something worth considering. If you want like really drastically different URLs for one type of content versus another, it's probably got to be 2 different content types. Hiding displaying author date information. So there's a way when you're configuring content types to choose whether it's going to say, written by Joe on, December 23rd, or not. So that's mostly appropriate for things like blog posts, for data within data sets, and for basic like informational pages about your project. It's not really appropriate to like have the information of who put it in there. It doesn't really matter. Which is not to say that data isn't being stored. So behind the scenes, if you want to pull up all the data that Joe put in because you suspect that he has been making typos or whatnot, you can pull all of that together. It just won't be hanging out for anyone to see. There's the issue of comments. So comments are turned on or off generally on a per content type basis. If you don't want comments anywhere on your site, you can just turn off the comments module and you'll be done with it. If you want comments on just one content type, say your blog posts, you do have to have the comments module enabled and then disable it for all the other content types. So if you have one set of things that you always want comments, and another set of things where you don't want comments, probably 2 different content types. And lastly, there's the issue of permissions. So as I mentioned before, really granular sets of permissions on things in Drupal. On a per content type basis, you can say, all right, this role of user can add content, can edit their own content, can edit any content, delete their own, or delete any. And so if you want to set it up so that students can enter one set of things but not another, probably 2 different content types. All right. There we go. Okay, so congratulations. Oh yes, you're ahead of the Wednesday class, by the way. That was as far as we got in the first session on Wednesday, but we have more time, so we can go on. But yes, question first.
I just have a quick question about sort of the linking to the taxonomy. How do you determine which field from the taxonomy gets put onto the contact display? So in other words,
yeah. So the directionality of things kind of depends on how you look at it. So this came up yesterday as the example of someone who sort of has some cultural heritage data, and they're storing locations, and then they have a content type for location, and then content type for documents, and then another one for artifacts, say. And what he wanted to do was have a field on his location that was a pointer to artifacts and documents. Which, as we talk through it, we realize, that's not really the best way to think about it, because the location is metadata about the object. It's not that the object is metadata about the location, really, if you think through it. So it's kind of whatever makes the most sense for your specific case. And you define all of these fields yourself, and you say what kind of content goes in there. Is this a number? Is this a date? Is this a pointer to some other content type or set of content types? So you make the decisions, but it's sort of like a common sense approach generally.
Well, I mean, so if you have, say, university, and you wanted it just to say Berkeley, but it's actually pointing to a big long list of information about Berkeley. How do you have it just be the name? How does it, you said a default for what actually gets what shows up as?
Yes, you can do when you're configuring each field, and we'll see this. You can set a default value, but also allow people to choose from other values on the list. So if you have a situation where you want it to be university, you know that there's occasional outside collaborators, but like most of the people who are going to be entering your system will be from Berkeley. You can set the default value to be Berkeley, and then someone can change it with something else on this list if it's appropriate. Does that answer your question?
Well, I don't mean that we,
Oh, no problem.
that the default would be Berkeley. I just mean, in other words, if your taxonomy is really a long list of fields, or is that accurate? Or,
So
values, I guess.
the taxonomy is a list of values.
List of values. So, but really on your contact, the primary value that you want to display is the name of whatever the institution is for each contact.
Okay, so in that case, like the way this looks is, you know, this location here on university is like additional metadata about the thing. What the person sees is like, you know, Berkeley, UCLA, etc. And what shows up and what they choose is the name of the university. Like the additional metadata doesn't show up unless you're actually kind of in the weeds with Berkeley itself. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have time to just kind of like walk through what's not something of what we've installed a little bit and like what this database would look like? To start to kind of throw some of these things down?
Like to set it up on your site it exists. That is most of what we'll do next time, but we can start doing that now. Since we have 20 more minutes than I plan on.
So can I go back to you had a list of additional modules, are we supposed to put those in? I mean, what is it, date and field group and?
Yes, for next time, or before we start actually adding fields to things. The example that we're going to walk through is the founders on the founders example. So with that one, you know, really date and references are going to be the two that you need to be able to work through those content types.
But can you tell us what those do?
Yeah, so date is basically a field to store structured dates. You determine kind of whether you want it, kind of what granularity you want it to be. It can be as broad as a year or as narrow as like year, day, year, month, day, hour, minute, second. You can get down to that level of specificity. There is another module that you would need to install if your dates have different levels of granularity. So if some of them are year, month, date, some of them are just year, there's another module that you need to install to make it a little bit more flexible. But it's a way to store date in a structured way that you can then use for timelines and for sorting and so forth. Which is not to say that necessarily all dates that you're going to use on your site will need to be structured this way. If you're using date basically just to like capture that information in a date field but aren't planning on using it to arrange things chronologically or anything, you could conceivably just have a text field where you could put in the date in whatever format makes sense, you know, just so it can be labeled under date. But if you want to use kind of dates as like a structural element for constructing, you know, visualizations and sort lists and so forth, you need this date module. Field group is a way to take bunches of fields, you know, other fields, you know, text fields and date fields and image fields and so forth, and it provides a kind of a UI element for grouping them together. So if you wanted to have kind of a section for biographical information and a section about, you know, courses taught and a section about something else, that's what field group will do. Link defines a URL field type. You can configure it in a bunch of ways, whether it, you know, pops open in your window or whether it you know, pops open in the same window, whether someone can give it a title, or whether they're just putting a URL in there. It's a link. References is a very powerful and useful module when you're creating content types. That basically is what allows you to be able to create these pointers between the different content types. It allows you to reference an existing node of the same or some other content type and create a field for doing that. It also allows you to create a pointer to a user. So if there's and there's a project directory that I run, where there's a field that says, who are the collaborators who worked on this project, and that uses a user reference field. So it's a pointer to some other user who exists in the database saying, okay, this person worked on this project. Depending on your data set, it might be better to model people as nodes, especially if those people are dead and you don't intend them to ever log into the site. We don't encourage ghosts to be using Drupal. So in that case, it might make sense to have people in the database as a content type and put in information about them. If you have a situation where there's a mix of living people and dead people, probably best to kind of privilege the dead people and treat people as a node, and then allow the user account for the living people to edit their own profile, rather than having a bunch of like fake accounts that no one will ever log into, for dead people. So those are the main modules that I've listed there for content types. There really are no shortage of others. There are modules for handling video. There are modules for handling embedded video from other sites. So being able to pull in like YouTube videos and stuff like that. Yeah, there's modules that provide players for media that you've uploaded to your site directly, images, you name it.
How do you know what to choose though, like from all these different things?
That's a good question. It's partly experience, but there are ways that you can suss out modules for whether this is kind of dodgy or not. So let's look at. All right, I'm gonna search for date and see if it actually comes up. Dodgy or not. So let's look at. All right, I'm gonna search for date and see if it actually comes up. Yeah, see, all right, I'm looking for the date module. This is a very common module. And the Drupal sort here, we're sorting by relevancy, mind you. First it suggests, do I mean data? And then the date module is not on the front page of results still. No, that's dates. Okay, so we're gonna go. Yeah, there we go. That's more like it. All right, so you found a module and you're curious, is this a good idea or not? So one of the things you can do is seeing like the maintenance status. Is it actively maintained? That's a good sign. Not all modules that are totally usable and fine have this. There are some that are seeking a co-maintainer or fixes only. And if the module basically doesn't have any security holes and it does what it needs to do, that's actually okay not to have an active developer on it, possibly. Development status under active development, all right, that's not a bad thing. This reported installs is a really good tip here. That's the number of sites that have like reporting back to Drupal.org turned on that currently have this site, and almost 500,000 sites are using this module. That's a pretty that's a pretty compelling number of sites, which is not to say that a module with much fewer installs is necessarily a bad one. So if we do Drupal, the partial date module, which is the one that you would use if your dates have different levels of granularity, this one only has 958 people on it. It is seeking a co-maintainer, meaning that the person who developed it would like some help, if possible. It's only in beta, but nonetheless, 958 sites are using it, hopefully more or less successfully.
Does it show, like, if you want to go see that site to see how they use it? Is there a way to...
No, it's anonymized, so unfortunately it doesn't... Sometimes individual modules will have in their documentation, like, see an example site here, but generally not. See, there's another thing. If you look at the view project statistics, view user statistics here, you can see kind of how it changes over time. This is most relevant for ones that have multiple different versions, like a recommended, a development, and then another one. And hopefully we're just showing the full release here. but yeah, you can see kind of how usage has changed over time. So this is all useful when you're trying to suss out, whether a module is a good idea. Another thing to check is looking at the statistics and the issues. So it looks like we have 5 new issues. The response rate is pretty fast here. Quite a few participants. If we look at the open ones, one of the annoying things that Drupal's done recently is that you have to log in and register for an account on Drupal.org to be able to kind of search and filter successfully. They may have changed that again. But it is useful to have an account on Drupal.org to be able to flag modules to watch. If there's something that looks promising but isn't quite ready yet, it'll send you updates. So yeah, you can look through the issue queue to see if there's anything that looks really problematic, or if you've installed a module and something is acting kind of funny, looking through the issue queue to see if you can find some keywords that match the issue that you're having is a decent way to debug. But yeah, honestly, in terms of deciding what modules to use, there's a lot of trial and error, and be sure to use backup and migrate first, just in case things go wrong. Reading through forums, trying to see what other people have used in similar situations. Yeah, it takes some experience. Any other questions?
So how do we use the backup and migrate in our site?
Yeah, so let's, I'm not sure I actually, did I install that one? Yes. All right, let me enable that, and I can show you how to do that real quick. All right, so one other thing with Drupal and configuring things, it's not always obvious where a module goes in the admin menu once you've installed it, any more than it's obvious where it goes on the module page. So if you, in this case, I actually don't know off the top of my head where backup and migrate. Oh, here it is. Configuration system backup and migrate. Wouldn't have necessarily thought to look there. So if you're not sure where something is, you can just click on modules and find the module you're looking for. And then you can click on configure here, and it will take you to the configuration pages no matter where it is. And then once you're on there, this little breadcrumb up here is your hint for how to get to it in the admin menu, because this parallels what the admin menu does. So configuration, system, lo and behold, there it is, backup and migrate. So this quick backup is what I tend to do when I'm messing around with stuff and I'm not sure if I'm going to screw it up or not. We say backup default database to download, so it's going to download to my computer using default settings. There's options for saving offsite copies to NodeSquirrel, which is a backup service, and you can add a note to the backup if you want. But we'll just hit backup now. And there it is. So then there's other options here. There's restore, and we can upload our backup file. And we can take the site offline to show a maintenance message while this is happening. But we'll just say restore now. And not that I've changed anything. Unindex. All right, it looks like it did successfully restore it there. So yeah, if you mess it up, it's really kind of a quick one-click thing to do. You can also...
Yeah, I got the same thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure, files and theme backup. I think I've actually come across this on actual sites too. I think this is a bug with the module itself, but it's not a functionality impacting one. You can also do things like set up automatic backups. You can set them up to and Pantheon has its own backup system. So if you're running with Pantheon, you can just use that. But if you're setting this up on your own server, you can configure it so that it will automatically back up on a set schedule, and then put that somewhere outside of Drupal itself, so that you can access it later if you want to back it up to how things were last Tuesday, say.
Question.
Yeah.
So that you install a module, or say that you back up the site, and after you back up the site, you install a module, and then you restore the site. Will the module that you install still be installed, but just not enabled?
Yes.
Okay.
You have to actually you have to into your file system and delete the module file for it to be completely gone. And the nice thing with disabling versus uninstalling modules is, let's say you're messing around with your modules and you uninstall or you disable something that you're actually using. As long as you don't uninstall it at that point, once you re-enable it, all of the settings that you've done relative to that module, if it's a block saying like where you put the block or the configuration that you've done, it'll like be right back where you had it before. Like disabling it doesn't delete all the stuff that you've stored in the database related to that. If you do go through the process of actually fully uninstalling it, it will delete the database tables associated with it, and then if you install it again in the future, you'll be back to scratch with it. But if you don't do that, things that you've done before will stay there. Any other questions?
So when you see those error messages come up and you just have no clue what they're talking about, do you just kind of like ignore it?
Depends on what it is. So let's do this again and see if we can get it again. With that one, we saw also a green success message, and so since it did say that like it did what we wanted it to do successfully, that's why I'm not worrying about it too much. What you can do is, if you're not really sure what's going on here, you can take part of the error message that doesn't have to do with your specific where your site is on the server. So anything that doesn't have like server-based paths, because that's obviously going to be like unique to your own site. But if you take this notice undefined index native file list,
Maybe if the line would be consistent.
Maybe the line sometimes works. Sometimes this error message comes up in another version of the module. So that might be a reason to exclude it. But you can go either way, and we just drop it into Google, and you see, all right, someone else is getting this. What's going on here? And you can see the discussion, and then try to debug it or kind of discount it as not actually problematic. Any other last questions? All right, so for next week, and I'll have Claudia send out the slides to you all. Why don't you try to install these modules before our next session, and then we'll start in next week with our example site and actually doing the data modeling and creating the content types, and then adding in the example content. And yeah.
If you wanted to do more and just work ahead and learn a lot on our own, is there a good resource just to follow that stuff?
Yeah, so there's a project that I'm working on that I'm hoping to turn into a book called Drupal for Humanists. And I have a bunch of links related to that up, and I can get those sent out with the slides. And it goes through content type modeling and everything. So if you want to try it with your own stuff, you can read through that and then try it on your own.
Where do we find that?
I'll have someone from the dlab send it out to everyone who's enrolled through email. Yeah, DrupalForHumanists.org is also, if you want to just dive into it directly. The dlab folks kindly request that you fill out the workshop feedback form. It's super quick, so I'll go hand these out. Yeah, thank you again for coming today, and I'll see you next Thursday.